Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fan X Fiction. Today we're going to be reading I Wanted to Be a Hero for Someone by Suro Yutsu. All IPs in the My Hero Academia storyline are owned in part by the creators of My Hero Academia. Everything in this story is purely fictitious and does not represent the canon made by the creators. Chapter 1 Life Breaks Us. It would be a great day if I could go back to that day. He was but a young child when he first learned what a hero was, barely past the age of 4 and innocent to the cruel world outside of his sheltered world, unknown to his harsh realities that would eventually plunge him into darkness. Back then, he was pure, untainted, as he found himself staring into the screen of a television with sparkling eyes, as the nameless faces of heroes saved people trapped in burning wreckage and rubble after a natural disaster. He was awed into silence by their actions, captivated by their bright costumes that had gleamed and shone in the light of flashing cameras, enraptured with the way that although their tired faces were streaked with dirt and blood, they were smiling, laughing even, as they passed one another on their trips to and from ruined buildings, holding to their chests crying individuals that thanked them with relief on their lips, as heroes placed the civilians into caring hands. Surviving high on adrenaline and pure willpower alone as they pulled chunks of debris off people and used quirks to put out fires and disperse smoke, doing everything they possibly could to help. As young as he was, he could not see the relief and warmth reflected from their tired eyes onto the screen before him when they found survivors, smiling as they assisted them out of danger. All he understood were their actions, and he loved it. Later, he would know all their names by heart, but for now, all he knew was their profession. Heroes. The newscaster had repeated the word constantly over the course of the segment, ranting and raving and using large words that his child self had trouble understanding. Rather than dissuade him, it made the little boy curious. He might not have been old enough to know its definition. Sure, he had heard the term before, but never really thought about it. Yet he immediately attached the meaning onto the men and women scaling mountains of collapsed rock. Some were even flying. It was so cool. Using their quirks, a word he knew for certain because of the fact that children his age never stopped talking about them, for good instead of bad. Using them to help rather than destroy, like the villains did. He didn't know that word either, but still knew it referred to the frankly intimidating individuals on the screen. The used words his father had said never to use as they were led into police vans by the heroes. Villains, he'd come to know, were despised. Heroes? The public praised them and their ideals. And it was deserved, for the heroes never asked for anything in return as they jumped day after day into the path of danger and saved countless lives. Instead, when asked for a reason, they replied with the signature one-liners that in a couple of years the small boy would be shouting out to his father.
The world is a better place when we all work together.
Compensation? A true hero never asks for compensation. The knowledge of a life saved is everything I could have ever hoped for.
With the development of quirks comes a freedom of choice on how to use them. What you choose determines the path you set out on.
Don't worry, I am here.
The boy was completely entranced by them. He reached out to touch the screen with tender and small fingers. Heterochromatic eyes grew wide with amazement and happiness the longer he watched them. A small sound of wonder escaped his parted lips not long after, and drew a confused noise out of the covered figure of his sleeping father. He slapped a hand over his mouth and kept quiet for a few seconds. One deep blue and one light brown-colored irises glanced in fear at the tousled onyx-colored hair that poked out from beneath a light-colored comforter, tinted an array of colors from the light of the television. The boy had snuck into his father's room once again after having a nightmare about the faceless monsters under his bed. He had been crying in relief by the time he'd finally woke up. Then in a split-second decision, he was frantically running full speed into his father's room after carefully jumping to avoid the dark gap under his bed. The tired man, who he had woken up when bursting in, simply opened his arms for the small boy to climb into, turn the television on to chase away the clinging darkness. Background noise, he had whispered into the curls on the little boy's head. his warm breath and soft tone easing a darkness the child didn't know he still carried. Nevertheless, knowing that the dark scared his child, the older man gently ran a hand down the trembling form of the boy until he calmed enough to stop crying. His father, now that his job was done and the fact that it was 2 a.m, accidentally fell back asleep minutes later instead of staying up with the boy like he usually did. It was then that the channel his father had absentmindedly picked had started playing a rerun of the evening news, showing the latest tragedy that had struck Japan and the heroes who had helped in the recovery effort. Selfless, honorable, heroic. They were the epitome of humanity, going up against superpowered villains or assisting in disasters when they were called for help. Sure, some heroes did it for money or for fame, but he would come not to bother with those heroes. He found that they, more often than not, twisted the meaning of being a hero into something that fit their own agenda, and only benefited themselves and not others. Those people were heroes only in title, he would often tell his father. No, he didn't like them. He loved the real heroes. The people on the screen he had watched as a child. They felt grief when they couldn't reach a life in time. They cried along with the family members and left flowers on the graves of people who they had failed to save. They screamed and hollered like excited schoolchildren when they successfully saved all the people in danger during an incident. The heroes on the screen felt so much and asked for nothing in return. They worked for hours alongside first responders or policemen and left with smiles instead of scowls. It stirred up a feeling of warmth in his chest. He wanted to help people too. He wanted to smile that freely too.
I want to be like them. I want to be a hero.
He whispered to himself in the slightly darkened room that same night, buzzing with the thought of what his quirk was going to be when it manifested. With a cry, he stood up on the bed, his legs squishing the sensitive flesh of a leg that didn't belong to him, determination filling his childish voice.
I will be a hero.
A groggy, half-asleep voice cried out in utter confusion and pain. Oops. Hikaru Shin sheepishly glanced into the confused blue eyes of his father. So much for not waking him up. A late bloomer, the doctor reassured them. His expression was puzzled when the x-ray revealed the correct number of bones that was associated with a quirk, his lips turning downwards as he scratched his balding head with one hand and readjusted his thick glasses. Lack of an extra joint in the pinky toe, a testament to their evolution as humans once they developed quirks.
Soon.
He said. When was soon? Hikaru asked the doctor quietly when he was sure his son wasn't listening. The boy was already a year past the normal expectancy period when developing a quirk. A bright, rambunctious 5-year-old that was devastated when his classmates in school blew past him with their newfound abilities. Even the doctor couldn't answer, shaking his head in thinly veiled disappointment. His father was worried not only about the lack of quirk manifestation, but also about how the news would affect his son in the long run. He knew about his son's desire to become a hero, and he wouldn't be able to stand it if he had to tell him he didn't have a quirk. They were the one thing Shin really admired about the heroes besides their personalities and cool costumes. The abilities that made them who they were, the way they could be differentiated from one another.
It'll be all right.
His father took him into his lap, and the little boy tuned back in, only to start crying at the news the doctor brought. He brushed his gentle hand through honey-colored locks as he wiped his son's tears away.
Is it true? Will I have a quirk when I'm older?
Shin sniffled in his lap, and Hiro grimaced, heart aching for his little boy. Here it was, the real question. He knew his answer would either cause the most damage or fill his little boy with hope.
That is what the doctor is suggesting, little one. He says you just probably need to be a little older to show it. For all we know, you have one right now. You just don't know how to activate it.
He watched as the brown and blue of his son's tearful eyes widened almost comically. A fire of hope ignited behind them.
I will?
Shin whispered hopefully.
It looks that way, my little one.
Hiro trained his gaze on the doctor before them, who was still guessing at the reasons behind the slow developing quirk, unable to look his son in the eyes. They were to assure him that he would have a quirk, and he never got one. That weight was something he never wanted to carry. Never. Shin blinked away his tears, forcing himself to take what he could and be content for the time being to let the subject drop and curl into his father's welcoming chest. Hiro never batted an eye as he wrapped his arms reassuringly around him. Shin hummed in contentment, his eyes closing against his will as he rubbed his runny nose on the soft cloth of his father's shirt, who grimaced in slight dismay, but was used to the exposure of bodily fluid that came with being a father by now, as he slid into the plane of being between awake and asleep. He was utterly exhausted from the hours spent in the hospital doing tests and taking x-rays.
Any previous quirks in the family?
The doctor asked a few minutes after sitting in silence while he scanned over the paperwork from the test results. Hiro looked up from where he was staring at the clean linoleum flooring, taking a moment to register the words before apologizing and answering the doctor sheepishly.
Yes, I have the ability to manipulate Earth.
The man whispered softly when his son slowly relaxed in his arms, speaking more confidently as he realized the little boy was asleep. He kept him settled against his chest as he spoke with the doctor.
And the mother?
Hiro unconsciously tightened his arms around his son in a protective manner.
She...
His voice trailed off into a whisper that the half-asleep boy could not catch, too busy focused on counting the sheep in his dreams to pay attention. By the time his father answered, he had already fallen asleep. Little did he know that by the time he found out who his mother was, it'd be too late. Shin had gotten a lollipop from the doctor for his good behavior. He scorned the reward, yet he still sucked on the nasty cherry-flavored candy during the silent car ride home. His mood sour as the expression on his face. Shin was already unbuckling himself from the car seat when his father came around to get him out, eager to get into the small house they lived in alone together, mere paces away from the car. If his eyes were red and puffy, his father didn't comment on it. The child could feel his unshed tears bubbling over once, at the sight of his father absently fixing a bump in the yard with his quirk. With a loud huff, he quickly turned away and marched inside. Behind him, Hiro sighed. His heart ached to see his son so heartbroken over his lack of quirk. Even if the doctor said he would develop one in due time, there was still a small chance he wouldn't. For the sake of his boy, he hoped he did. Hiro followed after him, hands twisting nervously in his white-collared shirt. Being a single parent was a tiring job, yet he wouldn't trade it for the world. Sleepless nights spent beside his son's bed to ward off nightmares. The endless workdays that seemed to blend together in order to provide for them both, and the crippling amount of love he endlessly showed his son. They all filled his heart in ways even being a hero didn't. That's why he quit. To raise and give his son the life he deserved in the absence of his missing mother. Every day he learned something new about parenting. Every day was a new experience he cherished. Yet sometimes it was hard to be on his own without anyone he could ask about the situations he didn't know how to handle. Of course, he had his best friend who was more like a brother, but these days they only had the time to talk over the phone, and that wasn't near as personal as they were used to. But such was life when his friend was a popular hero. For situations like these, Hiro had to learn on the spot how to deal with them. He loved his son, but he was always afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. This was one of those times. With a sigh, he realized his son had stopped by the door. He took pity on him when he saw him struggling to take off his shoes through his tears.
Shin, my lovely boy.
A deep rumbling voice filled the sobbing boy's ears, causing him to look up at the source. Hiro stared down at his son with crystal blue eyes before kneeling down in front of him. A rough thumb ran over the soft, chubby skin of Shin's cheek as Hiro smiled sadly.
Don't cry. With or without a quirk, I'll still love you.
But Papa,
Shin burst out, tears streaming down his cheeks as he yelled out his frustrations. Of course, he knew his father would always love him. That wasn't what he was worried about. Tiny hands balled into fists as he slammed them into his father's outstretched hand as he took a step back.
I want to be a hero.
He sniffled, wiping a mess of snot and salty tears on his shirt as he stood his ground, blue and brown orbs alight with determination.
Oh.
Shin was tiny for his age, yet the amount of fire he radiated shut down any doubts Hiro had. He grinned. His son would make an amazing hero someday. He just knew it.
You will. Even if you're quirkless or have a mundane quirk, you'll be a hero. Don't forget that, Shin. As long as you have the determination and will to become one, you will.
He knelt before his son and brought him into a hug.
I promise you can achieve anything you put your mind to.
The words of his father that day were the cause of the spark that lit the raging fire of hope within him. The one-way street of life continues on. Why doesn't Ikaru-kun have a mommy? Shouldn't everyone have a mommy? Eyes flickering towards the hunched figure of his teacher as he spluttered his classmate's name with a bright red face.
Kagami-san.
Wasn't the fact that his classmate had asked why he didn't have a mother that made him angry, but rather the insinuation that his father was somehow not up to par. His father loved and cherished him. He held him when he cried and let him sneak into bed with him on the scary nights and cooked good food. As far as Shin was concerned, he didn't need a mother. He never had one. His dad was more than enough. Although he too couldn't deny the small ball of curiosity within him to find out more about the absentee parent in his life.
Well,
His teacher continued in a soft voice that gave Shin a feeling that she also wanted to know.
sometimes relationships don't work out in the end, and that's why Ikaru-san only has a daddy.
With a hum, Shin sat back in his chair. That answer was useless. He grabbed a blank piece of paper in his hands from his school supplies as he thoughtfully sketched out his hero costume. His quirk hadn't yet shown itself, and his 6th birthday was the week before, but he refused to lose hope. If his father said he'd have a quirk, then it would come true. He trusted his father more than the kids that made fun of him for his lack of quirk. Later that night, he had asked the same question his classmates had, stuffing his face with the yummy rice on his plate and getting it everywhere in his attempt to be done before his father. Hiro sighed as he rolled his eyes fondly at the mess the 6-year-old was making.
Use your chopsticks correctly, Shin.
Shin purposefully dropped more rice on the table in response before asking,
Papa, why don't I have a mommy?
Hiro blinked in shock, and an odd expression twisted on his face. He was silent, and Shin had thought he'd made him mad before Hiro finally answered in a subdued tone.
She was a bad person, baby.
Who was she?
His father paused.
I'll tell you when you're older. Shin. Shin, come down and say hi.
A 6.5-year-old Ikaru Shin came charging down the hallway from his room with a loud roar. A dark mask covered his face, and he was armed with an All Might figurine in his small hand that he used as a weapon, as a makeshift cape billowed out behind him. He darted to the space before his father, planning to jump into his arms, but misstepping and causing the cape to twist underneath his feet. The small figurine went flying as he flailed.
I'm here.
Shin face planted with a loud bang, causing the surrounding adults to wince. Hiro smiled sheepishly to his guest as he took the now sniffling boy into his arms. It was becoming a little harder as the years passed to hold him, but not as much as it should have. Shin was still so small in life for his age that Hiro was beginning to become concerned. Was he not being fed enough? Was it a bad case of genes? Hiro didn't have time to think as Shin rubbed his eyes with a gloved fist and mumbled sadly,
I'm here.
"Are you all right, young Ikaru?" A thin hand clutched his toy in a gentle grasp as it appeared in front of his eyes. He followed the arms and was met with electric blue eyes and dark sunken sockets. Shin guessed he should have been scared, but his classmates had quirks so exotic, it changes what they look like. He figured the mystery man in front of him was no different. Besides, he looked familiar, and his eyes held no ill intent. In fact, they were warm and welcoming. He felt no fear.
Thank you for saving Tiny Mite.
Shin tucked his head shyly into the crook of his father's neck, legs kicking idly as he nervously twisted the figurine's arm into a fighting pose. The man beside his father was looking at Tiny Mite with a weird yet knowing expression. He glanced uncertainly between his father and the new man, tilting his eyes in curiosity. The adults stared at him expectantly, but when a reaction was not forthcoming, Hiro's eyes widened in understanding. It'd been a while since Shin had seen his friend, but even still the boy should have known who it was. His yellow-haired friend had been a staple in their house since Shin was born. It seemed the pro hero himself had finally gotten it. Sadness tinging his features before Hiro stepped in front of him and plopped down his son in front of him. He began to apologize profusely.
Oh, I'm sorry, Toshi-kun. It's just been a while since he's last seen you.
Hiro pushed Shin encouragingly towards the man.
Say hello to Toshinori. He's your godfather.
The man his father called Toshi-kun waved Hiro's apologies off with a melancholic grin. It's my own fault, Hiro. Sometimes it's easy to get so caught up in the job. You know how it is. Even though I now have Mirai with me, still difficult to get away. Hiro frowned.
Toshin,
Besides, everyone knows children have selective memories. Shin had a feeling they were talking about him and glanced up at the man in front of him. One thing that stuck out to him the most was the golden hair that stuck up in the back and made it look like he had just gotten up out of bed. The small boy giggled and watched as Toshinori smiled down at him. Deciding to trust his father, he thrust his toy figurine up in the air, startling the man if his step back was any indication. Now that he thought long and hard about it, he did remember the man in front of him from when he was younger. He relaxed even more.
Toshi-kun, do you like All Might?
Shin proudly showed him the hero he was currently obsessed with.
When I grow up, I'm going to be just like him. You can't be my friend if you don't like him because he is the coolest hero.
He hit the air with his other hand and made his voice deeper in an attempt to imitate the hero.
Don't worry, I am here.
Shin was too busy giggling to see the knowing glances the adults threw at each other. Hiro laughed wholeheartedly at his son's display, while Yagi Toshinori smiled widely. Oh, is that so? In that case, All Might is my favorite too. He knelt down beside the boy and placed a hand in his hair. You'll make an honorable hero, young Shin. The child beamed beneath his hand.
Even if I don't have a quirk?
Toshinori blinked, shocked into silence by his words. His quirk still hadn't shown itself? He turned towards Hiro with a questioning glance and was met with a small shake of his head, his sky-blue eyes holding pain even with the smile on his face. Toshinori nodded and turned back to the boy in front of him. Even then. He was shocked once more when the boy threw his arms around his neck and squealed.
I knew you had good taste. You're my new best friend.
Toshinori smiled and wrapped his arms around his best friend's son, the hero already swearing his undying friendship, for the third time already, to the small child in his arms.
Come on, Toshi-kun, come look at my toys.
With a final exasperated glance towards Hiro, he was pulled away from the living room. The retired pro hero Earthbound sat across from his long friend and also pro hero, All Might. They had met when they were still just teenagers before the UA Academy, before Shimura, when they were just two kids trying to fight their way through life and formed a tight bond when they entered the hero industry together. A bond that had only grown stronger as they grew older. Though Toshinori was a few years older than Hiro, who had been bumped up to the class he participated in after Nana Shimura's recommendation that they be kept together. They managed to get along just fine. More than well, actually. Enough that when they became pro heroes, despite having different lives and levels of fame, even though Earthbound was All Might's sidekick, Hiro and Toshinori continued to be a touchstone in the other's life. All Might had been there when his son was born, and the devastating events that had followed. He had helped Earthbound take care of the newborn in the rough months after his mother fled. Shin's mother had been a mysterious one, but a mystery that drew Hiro in like a moth to a flame. He met her when she suddenly showed up one day out of the blue, gravely injured with no clue who she was or how she had gotten there. Earthbound had been the hero who had found her. For months he kept up with her case and in contact with the woman he had saved, at her insistence because she wanted to give proper thanks to her savior. Months later, she had never gotten her memories back, but had to be eventually helped back into normal society by Earthbound and his associates. While he tried to keep his private life from the hero one, she had somehow managed to dig her way into his heart. Somewhere along the line, they had fallen in love. He should have known better. It was all too suspicious. It was all a lie. From the very beginning, Hiro had come to find out. All Might had felt something off with her from the get-go. Hiro marking off his concerns as paranoia. He should have listened to his worries. But there was never any proof, and they were never sure until the very end. As far as cliché goes, she had gotten pregnant. Hiro had the perfect life planned out for them, retiring from his role beside his best friend to take care of the little one on the way, getting a normal and less dangerous job, marrying the woman of his dreams, A white picket fence kind of life that was sure to be full of happiness. But also, as cliches go, she was a villain, revealing herself at the last second while wrangling her newborn baby from the screaming nurses, being showered with and drowning in despair.
Let him go, Avilia.
Earthbound was yelling at the villain who had his child. Their child. One minute, he'd finally gotten the family he always wished for. And the next, his wife, villain, he thought scornfully, took his newborn child into her arms and threatened to kill them all, right then and there. The harsh wind whipped his hair back and forth, only adding to his frustration. It was supposed to be a joyous day, and now it was nothing but a horror show. The screaming nurses were giving him a headache, and instead of acting semi-calmly, they chose to panic. The birth of his child had quickly went downhill and turned into a hostage situation.
Let him go, Avilia. I won't ask again.
She smiled dangerously, all teeth. A hand that had once caressed him so tenderly now rested on the forehead of his wailing son, gentle and lovingly. Not at all like the menacing expression mirrored on her face. Hiro shuddered, gritting his teeth in anger. Who was she? Was Avilia even her name? This woman who had wormed her way into his heart had turned out to be a parasite. He had been played, and it was his own goddamn fault. His blindness led to the endangerment of his child, for fuck's sakes. Hiro lunged at the woman in front of him, a guttural cry echoing off the roof of the hospital as he desperately tried to take the screaming child back.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Her laugh, once sounding like the beautiful twinkling of wedding bells, was now a vicious warning that stopped him short. Condescending. Dangerous. She held the child away from her chest.
I could drop him. One misstep and I would throw all I've worked for away. The years spent swindling myself into your bed,
Avilia smiled even wider.
you'd be amazed by how many guys fall to their knees once you show a little cleavage and vulnerability. Shouldn't a hero have stronger morals?
Hiro felt the cold sweat begin dripping down his forehead and between his shoulder blades, the fabric of his shirt seeming too trapping. He swallowed hard, anger temporarily forgotten in favor of fear. His son's life was on the line. The persona of Earthbound was needed. With a deep breath, he steeled himself, a chill wind keeping the worst of the sweat away. Earthbound was now staring at the situation from the eyes of a pro and not a fearful parent. Fear leads to doubt. Doubt leads to hesitance. Hesitance leads to mistakes. He had no room for fear. Fear would cause him the life of his newborn. Earthbound narrowed blue eyes at the villain in front of him and replayed the conversation in his head, searching through the words for an explanation, a weakness he could exploit.
Why now?
He took a step away from the villain who was standing on the ledge of the roof and assessed the situation.
You said it yourself. You spent years trying to woo me into bed. You could have ran when you were pregnant. You could have left the minute you found out. Why? Why did you stay? Just why?
And if his voice broke, who could blame him? He was just given an impossible pill to swallow. The one he loved was a villain who had used him. He loved her. Fuck. He loved her. Even now, in the midst of battle, Hiro felt his heart shatter. He loved the woman in front of him. Had been for years. His eyes stung with unshed tears. The academy never warned him about this part. He was never trained in how to deal with this.
Why? Simple. I wanted to watch you crumble.
His eyes widened in horror as he raised a hand, as if to grasp her when she took a step back. Off the roof, into thin air. The world came crashing down upon him, the cool winter air driving its way painfully into his lungs when he gasped. Chest constricting painfully as the tears blurred his vision. But still, he couldn't look away. Keeping eye contact with the face of his son, little hands clenched into fists as he screamed. His heart was going to die. Later, he would think back on this moment when naming his son Ikeru Shin. He would smile and say in the comfort of his old friend. In that moment, all he could think about was the future Avilia had stolen out from under him. A future with his son. He would never get to look into those eyes, whatever color they were. He would never get to play with those soft cheeks, red from the biting cold and stained with tear tracks from crying. He would never get the chance to be a father. Avilia laughed. Hiro screamed. His son cried. A loud swoosh was heard and all was right in the world. Do not worry, Earthbound. Open your eyes. Hiro hadn't even realized he closed them, trembling as he took in the sight before him. Legs almost giving out in utter relief when he saw his friend in front of him. He cried. All Might was there, standing tall, and in his arms was the sniffling newborn. Avilia being held by the back of her hospital gown as she thrashed in his other hand. Sorry for taking so long, old friend. I was buying the little one some gifts. If I had known this would happen, I would have come sooner. There was genuine regret and sadness in his usually loud, booming voice. In his mindless panic on getting his child back, he had completely forgotten the postponed arrival of his friend, number one hero, All Might, who was coincidentally the godfather to his child. Hiro snorted, all tension instantly leaving his body, including the held-back tears. They streamed freely now as he gave Toshinori a wobbly smile.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
With a shaky laugh, he slowly made his way to All Might's side. Earthbound took his child from the pro hero and clutched him tightly to his chest, fingers shaking. This in turn allowed All Might to restrain the unknown villain completely. Hiro nodded his thanks again. But it wasn't over. They had underestimated Avilia. With a cry, she flipped herself over All Might's huge arm, having torn herself from the hospital gown, and left it in his empty hands. She smirked, eyes greedily raking themselves over Shin. Hiro growled as Toshinori planted himself between them, blocking her view of the baby.
You don't know who I am yet, do you? Well, does this help?
It was then that they both felt it. Her quirk. There was a building pressure in his veins, his ears suddenly clogged with the sound of rushing blood. His vision darkened along the edge as he was forced to his knees. Shin was crying once again as Hiro struggled to breathe and hold on to his child at the same time. What? The deep voice of All Might had somehow managed to pierce the wall of fog around his brain. Earthbound managed to force himself to look up. All Might was in the same position as he was, Avilia above them both with a grin, hand outstretched, palm down. With a cold terror, Hiro finally realized who they were dealing with. The villain. BB. An acronym for Bloodbender. She was using the blood within their bodies to control their muscles. She could make them do anything she wanted. They were fucked. All Might's signature smile was strained, and the telltale twitch of his muscles had shown Hiro that he was struggling to break the hold. He could only hope. He could only pray that they would be okay. The freezing December air only reminded him of the dire situation. She had wanted a child who would carry the combined quirks of them both, someone who she could raise as an apprentice and give to the boss of the organization she was with. When her quest had ultimately failed, she fled, leaving Earthbound with the young newborn who he had named Shin. Hikaru Shin was 6.5 years old and was currently asleep in his room after spending the evening playing with his godfather. Hikaru Hiro possessed a knowledge that not many were privy to. He knew a great deal about many things people would count as wise. He knew about love and heartbreak. He knew about the inner workings of a society filled with quirks, and how a symbol single-handedly pushed heroism into a new era. But most importantly, he knew how to be a friend. How is this knowledge worth anything? One might ask this simple question only to receive a simple answer. It just was. Because he was privy to such knowledge, he knew about Yagi Toshinori's most well-kept secret, the torch on which relied one for all. In fact, he'd actually known the possessor before Yagi. Being friends with him, Hiro had met the woman quite a few times. His younger self was always frightened of the woman. Most importantly, he knew about All for One, which was one of the reasons he called Toshinori to begin with. Not just to see how much his son had grown in the couple of years, the boy somehow always being asleep when Toshinori came around, since they had last seen each other. It was something bigger. Something big that would affect the world as they knew it. Hiro set the cup of tea he was drinking down onto the coffee table between them. I can see the worry in your eyes, old friend. Spit it out, Toshinori said gently. Hiro jumped and looked up at him, having not realized he zoned out. He smiled weakly.
It's Shin.
Toshinori perked up at that. He'd just gotten his energetic godson to sleep not even an hour ago. What is it?
Promise me you'll protect him. Please. can't shake away the feeling something is going to happen. And I want him to be safe and taken care of when it does. Toshinori, I trust you. Please,
Hiro choked, unshed tears in his eyes.
take care of my son.
I will. Toshinori's voice was soft as he threw a thin arm around his longtime friend's shoulders, holding him close as he promised. I swear. Without embracing a hope for the future. Time went on, the seasons changed. Shin's quirk was still non-existent. His classmates were now only ghosts in his world. The work was one step up from when he was 6. The monsters under his bed were now replaced with crushing loneliness so great he drowned in the blackened depths of his own mind. The flame of hope, once so bright and consuming, was now just a pile of embers, desperately clinging to life. Not even the now constant visits from Toshinori could keep them alive. And so passed the 7th uneventful year of Hikaru Shin's life. You see, I was manipulated by someone else. Hikaru Shin was 8 years old when his father died. Shin was 8 years old when his quirk had finally shown itself in a terrifying explosion of crimson. It was an event that would traumatize him for years to come. It was the first and last time he would meet his mother. It was the last time he would feel the warmth of his father's love. Because till the very end, Hiro had loved his son. Shin was just 8 years old when the world had shown its cruel way. That not all men were created equal. Some men were born monsters. Do you think this shredded up heart of mine will heal?
I love you.
No.
This has been a dramatic reading of I Wanted to Be a Hero for Someone by Suru Yutsu. Thank you all so much for watching today's video, and thank you all so much for sitting down and listening to a story.